Hello and welcome to the next installment of your video lectures here, Marketing 221. This is Chapter 6 we're going to be talking about. Chapter 6 is all about consumer behavior and consumer decision making. Now, you marketing majors, most of you will probably take consumer behavior, which is a course that we offer here at St. John Fisher, taught by Dr. Isar Kiani. Excellent course for you management majors. You might take it also. For you accounting and finance majors, probably not. Like anything else in this particular book, we're just going to be scratching the surface, talking about key terms for buyer behavior and the consumer decision making. And we're going to talk about the consumer decision making process. That's going to be part one of the video. Part two then, after part one, you'll have some discussion questions and the video will pause. Part two then will be the individual and other influencing factors on consumer decision making, such as personality and motivation and reference groups and opinion leaders and things like that. And then there'll be a couple of discussion questions after that. So the video really will be in two parts, and after both parts there will be video discussion questions. Like always, at the end of the video lecture, please make sure you do those video discussion questions and turn them into me on either Thursday or Tuesday, depending on when your class time is. So until then, let's get started with consumer behavior and the consumer decision-making model. So as I stated in the introduction, this chapter is all about consumer decision-making and the consumer decision-making model. Most of the chapter deals with the consumer decision-making model, and that's really where our focus is going to be. So consumer products and services preferences are constantly changing. And we as marketers need to understand consumer preferences and consumer behavior in order to offer the best marketing mix we possibly can. Remember, what I mean by the marketing mix is the 4 P's. Price, the best product, the best delivery we can or place, and the best promotional campaign or way to communicate to our customers. So as consumer behavior changes, we need to make sure that we are up to speed. We need to understand consumers' desires, consumers' wants, and consumers' needs, and then also understand how consumers make purchase and how they want to make purchase. In the last 20 years, the consumers, the way they've made purchases and the way they've driven purchases have changed significantly with the advent of the internet. More and more consumers are shopping online, and if they're not shopping online or buying online, they're at least shopping online and then going to a store once they find the proper item at the proper price. So what we're really looking at is we're looking at value. And if you really want to know the definition of value is the delta, or what you get for what you purchase, or what you get in return for what you've paid for. The difference between what you get and what you pay for is value. So it doesn't have to be really expensive to have value. Something could be very inexpensive but provide what it does, and that provides good value. So value is really a personal assessment type of thing, whether they got what they paid for or whether they got more than what they thought it was worth. Perceived value is value the customer perceives from the purchase, and utilitarian value is derived from the product or service that helps solve or accomplish a problem. So moving on, this is the consumer decision-making process. We have need recognition is the first step. The second step is information search. The third step is evaluation of alternatives. Then we finally purchase or we buy something. And then the fourth step is post-purchase behavior. Most of the chapter talks about these 5 steps in the consumer decision-making process. Now, embedded in these 5 steps are a person's cultural or social beliefs, the individual, psychological and physiological things that are going on in an individual's life, family values, and all of those types of things make an individual consumer decision-making process so complex. That's why when we study consumer decision-making, we've got to really study it from an individual or a target market's perspective versus a aggregate perspective. So let's start with need recognition, which is the first stage in the consumer decision-making process. Need recognition is an imbalance between actual and desired states. Again, it's the first stage in the decision-making process. Now, the difference between needs and wants is important. If you take a look at Abraham Maslow, who had his hierarchy of needs, he said the first need is physiological, which means you have a need for really three things. You have a need for food, you have a need for water, and you have a need for warmth or shelter. Now that warmth can be shelter or it can be clothing or both. Maslow says that that is the first order of human needs. Without that, human cannot exist. Maslow also said that it's the first order of any need, both human and any other animal, and humans and animals will do almost anything to satisfy that need. A want is how you satisfy that need. For instance, you need clothing. You need it to cover your body, and you need it for warmth. But you want Nike, or you want a designer type of piece of clothing. If we didn't have a want, we'd all be walking around with, potato sacks covering our bodies. So, you have a need for food, but you want a burger. You have a need for food, but you want a steak, something like that. So a want is how you fill that need. Now, I know it says right here, a want is a recognition of an unfulfilled need of a product that will satisfy it. That's a long definition to say a want is what fills a need. And we as human beings really have three basic needs, and that's food, it's water, and it's shelter. Now, any type of stimulus can trigger a need or a want. That stimulus can be advertising, it can be you see somebody wearing something or having something. It could be many, many things. And any one of our input, our five senses, can trigger that need. And that could be sight, you see it, you smell it, you taste it, you touch it, you hear it, what have you. The want-God gap is the imbalance between the actual and the desired states. So right now your actual state is you're hungry, your desired state is to satisfy that hungry. You see a commercial on TV for a pizza, you go and you go buy that pizza. You could have a want-gap that says, I'm not as popular as I want to be. I know the popular people wear these types of clothes, so you go out and you buy clothes that will satisfy that need. Sometimes it doesn't trigger consumer action or consumer purchase. Sometimes you just think about it. But if the gap is large enough, generally speaking, consumers will take action on that want. So the next step in the consumer decision-making process is information search. So you have a need recognition, you've got the need-want gap, you've got needs and wants, and now you've got to try to find something to satisfy that. So you go through information search. Really, there's only two types of information searches. And I'll be right back. I got to shut my door. There, that's better. It's a little bit quieter. So there's really two types of information search, internal and external. Generally speaking, somebody has an internal search when they have bought it before, they've liked it, they know the product, and so they, generally speaking, when they need the product or they need more of the product or they need to satisfy that want or that need because they bought it before, they reach for the same product. Oftentimes, internal search can be with a very low involvement purchase, not a high involvement purchase, and something that somebody's very comfortable with. One of the key things that marketers need to understand is when you have an internal information search, that particular consumer is not as vulnerable to advertising. So, for instance, let's say you always drink Coke. Every time you need a soft drink, you always drink Coke. Well, you're not as vulnerable to Pepsi or Mountain Dew or some of those other commercials because you always drink Coke, you look for Coke, you reach for Coke. That's your internal information. External information is when you seek information because you either don't have enough information for the internal information search, you didn't like what you did, or it's a high involvement purchase, or it's a very visible purchase like clothing or something like that. Obviously, when you buy a pair of jeans, you're comfortable with a pair of jeans, you could go back and buy that pair of jeans again, but one of the problems is you don't wear the same clothes every single day. You want to switch it off. So that's why, generally speaking, you have an external information search. That is much, much, much more vulnerable to advertising and to marketers' control. That's why you see a lot of ads, a lot of different commercials, and different things trying to influence people's external information search. So, customers seek more information when there's a lot of information available or it's a high involvement purchase. Customers seek less information when there's less risk involved. It's not a high involvement purchase. They have a low level of interest. They don't have confidence in the decision they're making, or they really do not have time in order to search. All of those things make an external information search people seek less information. They seek more information when there's more risk, when it's a high involvement purchase. They seek it more when it's social and visible, and also they have lack of confidence in the decision. The next stage in the consumer decision-making process is evaluating purchase alternatives. There's really three methods: the evoked set method, the multi-attribute approach, and the effect referral. The first one is evoked set. Evoked set is when a brand comes to mind and the consumer understands that brand. Now really, there's three types of evoked set. There's the inert set, the inept set, and the evoked set. Inert set is brands come to mind and you don't really have a preference over brand. For instance, for me, chewing gum. I know I want mint gum. I could probably come up with three brands: Wrigley's, Strive, I don't know, another one. But neither of them really does anything for me, and I would buy any one of them. So that's your inert set. Your inept set is when a brand comes to mind and you would never buy it. Maybe they've done you wrong, you bought it before, or you really don't like it, or someone told you something negative about it, etc. That's the inept set. And then finally, under the evoked set is the evoked set. Evoked set are the brands that come to mind and brands that you would probably or most likely purchase. For instance, if I think of insurance, I think of Farmers, I think of Geico, I think of Allstate, and I think of Nationwide and Progressive. Those would be my evoked set. Therefore, when I'm looking for insurance, I would probably call those to get the quote. Evoked set is what advertisers try to get. If the advertiser can get into your evoked set, that means there's a chance that you will buy it, and therefore they try to get into your evoked set, and that's one of the objectives of advertising. That's why you see consumer advertising over and over and over and over again, like insurance companies. Even though right now you're probably not thinking about insurance companies, if they can get into your evoked set, eventually you might purchase them. So the second method of evaluation of alternatives is multi-attribute approach. I also take a look at this as like a Ben Franklin, where you put the pros on one side and the cons on another. So what you would do is you would go through different attributes of a particular product. Then you would go through the attributes that you want in a particular product. You would then compare one to another and make a purchase that way. For instance, let's say you want to go on vacation summer of 2020. So you say, okay, what's important to me is I want to go someplace warm, it's got to have a beach, got to have a pool, got to have some nightlife, and I want to get there in one day. So then you take, those are your attributes you're looking at, and then you would take a look at, okay, now we got Disney, we have South Florida, we've got the Bahamas, etc., etc. So that's your multi-attribute approach. And then finally, effect referral is a method of evaluating alternative. And it's kind of hard to explain, but effect referral means you buy it and you don't know really why you buy it. You just always have. It's something that you just always purchase. It's always been that brand. It's never been any different. Best example I can think of an effect referral is my mother and Jif peanut butter. My mother always buys Jif peanut butter, smooth Jif peanut butter. And when the grocery store is out of Jif peanut butter, she won't buy peanut butter. And when I asked her one time, why do you always buy Jif? She said, I don't know. I just always have. And so that's part of an effect referral. Consumers buy it, and they're not exactly even sure why they buy it, but they do. So beyond the product of what to buy, consumers have to make the decision on whether to buy, when to buy, where to buy, whether it's on store or online, how to pay for it. All those other types of decisions are part of the consumer decision-making process. We look at evaluation of alternatives as to the three methods, but that really determines the what to buy, the product type or the brand. But there's also other decisions that need to be made, such as whether to buy, when to buy, etc. So planned versus impulse purchase. Planned purchases are when you use a multi-attribute approach, or you do an external search, you do a major external search, you plan to purchase it. Partially planned purchases are when you go to a mall or something like that, you decide you want something, and then you look around and make that purchase. And then, of course, impulse purchases are when you simply see something, you like it, you buy it right there. Oftentimes, impulse purchases are for low involvement goods, or when they see something that really catches their eye or that's very eye-catching. Cognitive dissonance is what we call buyer's remorse, or the inner tension that a consumer experiences between the inconsistency of their need-want gap. Cognitive dissonance happens when you purchase something and you don't like it. Oftentimes it's a major purchase. Cognitive dissonance can happen when you purchase something and somebody says something about it, something negative about it, etc. We reduce cognitive dissonance by seeking information, also by trial and error, trying something on at the store, some clothes or something like that, avoiding information that contradicts what we purchased, returning the product, being able to return the product. All those types of things are help reduce cognitive dissonance within a consumer. So the level of consumer involvement, we've got routine, which means there's very low level of involvement, routine purchases, limited, and extensive. Generally speaking, for routine purchases, there's a low involvement. The time you take to shop is very short. The cost oftentimes is very low. Your information search is internal only. And generally speaking, there's a number of alternatives. One, sometimes it's only effect referral. Then you've got limited, which is low to moderate involvement, short to moderate time. The information search is mostly internal, but you might use a little bit of external. The cost is low to moderate, and the number of alternatives is few. And then, of course, you got extensive consumer involvement, which has high time or long time, high cost, high involvement, both internal and external, and usually is a pretty extensive external search. and then you've got a lot of alternatives to choose from. Factors that determine the level of involvement is previous experience. If you bought it a lot, you liked what you buy, the level of involvement will be low. The interest, if you don't have a lot of interest in it, the level of involvement will be low. If you've got a lot of interest in it, a level of involvement will be very high. Perceived risk or negative consequence, if there's very little risk or little negative consequence, your level of involvement will be very high, low, and vice versa. And close, I use close as an example here because there is some perceived risk and there is some negative consequences if you buy something that doesn't look nice on you or that doesn't meet your particular style. And that goes to social visibility also. So marketing implications, high involvement purchases, generally speaking, people are very prone to advertising, very prone to communication. Those types of commercials are, generally speaking, have a lot of features and benefits in it, have a lot of emotion in it, and they really drive to the target market. Low involvement purchases, you see a lot of the in-store promotion, or what I call POPs, point of purchase material. Oftentimes they're in display racks close to checkout counters or when you first walk in. Oftentimes the display racks are very eye-catching. The labels are very eye-catching. And you have a lot of what I call sales promotions. 2 for 1, couponing, buy one, get one free, or a BOGO, or those types of things. Those are all your marketing implications for low and high involvement questions or purchases. Speaking of questions, I'm going to stop the video right now and we will start with part 2 after this. Here is your discussion questions. Please answer these discussion questions and turn them into me on either Tuesday or Thursday, depending on when your class is. And I will be right back with part 2 of consumer decision making or consumer behavior.